On February 20, 1945, in the northern area of Iwo Jima, Japanese troops in defensive setups observed unusual U.S. tanks advancing amid the volcanic dust. Dark fumes followed behind, but not due to injury. Something else entirely. The tank's turrets swung in the direction of a reinforced concrete shelter, yet, instead of the expected primary cannon, it featured an altered tube, ending in a spout. Moments later, a sharp mechanical whistle echoed, reminiscent of pressurized gas releasing. Immediately after, a surge of flaming liquid spewed over 150 yards of ash-covered ground, swallowing the adjacent blockhouse in a viscous inferno of napalm-laced destruction. The cries of agony endured just brief moments. Defenders of Japan grasped at their battlefield communication lines to relay the bizarre sight they had just seen. 8 altered Sherman vehicles fitted with flame projectors, armaments unfamiliar to the Japanese forces. These devices would forever alter the dynamics of fighting in the Pacific conflict's fiercest engagement. Unbeknownst to Yamada, such apparatus stemmed from extended clandestine efforts at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. Highly classified alterations performed by Navy engineers laboring non-stop. This fusion of U.S. manufacturing prowess and urgent combat demands yielded what a certain Marine unit leader later dubbed the operation's premier individual armament. The Iwo Jima campaign had progressed to its second day, and the calculus of fatalities stood on the brink of profound shift. Those 8 vehicles alone would cause more than 30% of Japanese losses via fiery annihilation, a figure that lingered in the nightmares of veterans from either side for generations. The Imperial Japanese forces had devoted a full year to reshaping Iwo Jima into the Pacific's ultimate bastion. Across 8 square miles of rugged lava, they forged an impregnable stronghold that challenged standard warfare principles. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, tasked with overseeing the island's protection since June 1944, grasped acutely that victory over the Americans lay beyond reach. His objective diverged sharply: render the seizure of Iwo Jima so exorbitantly expensive that America might abandon plans to assault the Japanese mainland. Kuribayashi had examined the shortcomings of Saipan, Peleliu, and the Philippines campaigns. Conventional Japanese strategies, confronting invaders right at the water's edge, unleashing huge banzai assaults, had failed disastrously against U.S. armament superiority. The commander opted for a bold innovation, defying ages of warrior heritage. No valiant rushes forward, no fighters pursuing noble demise in exposed clashes. Rather, his 21,000 soldiers would engage from concealed depths, morphing Iwo Jima into an invisible zone of slaughter. Come February 1945, Japanese builders had finished 11 miles of linked passageways, aiming for 17 miles in all. Finished portions plunged 7 levels into the hardened lava. They excavated 5,000 caverns and buried rooms, some spacious enough for 300 to 400 troops. 1,500 hardened outposts marked the terrain, cemented strong points with 4-foot-thick barriers, bolstered by iron bars reclaimed from forsaken building sites, topped key elevations. Positions were strategically placed for overlapping coverage. Virtually every part of the island's exterior lay under the sweep of Japanese weaponry, concealed behind metal portals that parted solely for shots, then closed tight against counterfire. The network of passages proved a feat of ingenuity. Air vents masked as ordinary stone outcrops supplied breathable oxygen. Subterranean medical facilities, complete with surgical suites, stood ready for 400 casualties. Buried command posts 75 feet underground managed defenses via extensive cabling. Depots stored sufficient provisions, rice, water, munitions, for a 2-month blockade. The grandest buried facility under Hill 382 housed a space measuring 50 meters in length and 20 meters across, ample for a whole battalion. Kuribayashi arrayed his units with calculated accuracy. The southern zone near Mount Suribachi formed a somewhat autonomous unit led by Colonel Kanemitsu Atsuchi, deploying 2,000 personnel to artillery sites targeting invasion shores. The northern flatlands, ideal for holding ground, contained the main Japanese contingent, 15,000 under Kuribayashi's immediate authority. Linking these bastions, a core contingent of 4,000 could bolster any pressured area via the underground paths. U.S. commanders anticipated Iwo Jima's toughness. Scout assessments indicated solid preparations, yet the extent of Kuribayashi's buried citadel evaded overhead surveillance. 74 straight days of airstrikes had unleashed 6,800 tons of ordnance onto the terrain. Ship-based shelling had launched 22,000 projectiles at enemy holds. U.S. strategists assumed such preliminaries had neutralized much opposition. They forecasted conquest within 5 days. Their miscalculation proved devastating. The initial barrage had neutralized fewer than, out of the 1,500 heavily fortified sites on Iwo Jima, only 200 fell during the intense assault. The extensive network of tunnels stayed largely undamaged. The overwhelming barrage from naval and aerial forces left most Japanese troops virtually unharmed. 5 months prior to the operation, at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii, Colonel George F. Unmarked gathered a group that would transform mechanized combat across the Pacific theater. A veteran Army officer boasting 44 years in uniform, Unmar oversaw the U.S. Army Chemical Warfare Service's most classified initiative in the Central Pacific, known as CNPAC. His objective centered on crafting a device to overcome the Japanese underground strongholds, which had resisted all standard armaments. UNMAC started with a modest unit, the 43rd Chemical Laboratory Company. Recognizing the project's scale demanded top expertise, he pulled in 25 specialists from the 117th Naval Construction Battalion. These Seabees, famed for their inventive mechanics and hands-on engineering prowess across the islands, brought vital skills. He also incorporated members from the 5th Marine Tank Battalion and the 81st Ordnance Company, forging an unprecedented inter-service unit driven by one goal: to devise a tool that could incinerate the enemy from their hidden lairs. Guiding the engineering efforts were machinists mate First Class A. Riker and electricians mate Second Class Joseph Klee, a pair of Seabees whose contributions stayed out of the spotlight yet preserved countless U.S. lives. Drawing from hard-won insights in earlier Pacific battles, they had witnessed Marines perish in futile charges against impregnable defenses untouched by shelling. Their insight cut to the core. The issue lay not in raw destructive power, but in delivering it precisely to foes concealed below ground. The obstacle loomed large. Earlier efforts to adapt flamethrowers for armored vehicles yielded inconsistent outcomes. The Army's early prototypes amounted to rough improvisations, basically handheld burners affixed to vehicle exteriors. The Marines' 30 acquired Canadian Ronson models reached just 60 to 80 yards using viscous fuel, with reserves permitting only 30 to 40 seconds of discharge. These devices proved unreliable headaches, prone to breakdowns in action, with malfunction rates surpassing 40% under operational stress. Progress emerged with modifications to M3 light tanks, nicknamed Satan vehicles. The 43rd Chemical Company's prototype, dubbed Hell's Fire, showcased the idea's promise while exposing key flaws. Turret rotation capped at 180 degrees. The flame project's vertical adjustment was constrained. Above all, the vehicle's slender plating left it exposed to the ubiquitous Japanese 47mm anti-tank weapons in fortified zones. UNM's crew required a superior solution. Via high-level military liaisons extending to Admiral Chester Nimitz's headquarters, UNMA secured 8 M4A3 Sherman medium tanks ripe for adaptation. Weighing 35 tons each and driven by a 500-horsepower Ford GAA V8 motor, these machines featured plating from 25 mm to 76 m thick. Their usual setup included a 75 m primary cannon plus several 30-caliber machine guns. Having endured punishing fights in Europe, the Shermans offered the resilience to withstand Japanese armor-piercing rounds. Securing the vehicles marked just the start. True advancement arrived as Riker and Clay merged superior features from 3 proven flamethrower setups: the British Ronson, the Navy's Mark I, and seized German models from North Africa. Laboring around the clock in Hawaii's sweltering climate, napping in turns near their fabrication tools, the Seabees crafted a groundbreaking apparatus. The outcome, labeled CB-H-1 for Construction Battalion Hawaii 1, marked a dramatic advance in incendiary weaponry. Fitting it demanded 150 pounds of welding material and a 1-100 electrical links, every one essential to performance. Each overhaul consumed 1,200 labor hours per vehicle, with 150 components custom fabricated by CB fabricators. The expense ran $20,000 to $25,000 apiece, roughly $360,000 in today's dollars. Its capabilities broke new ground. The CBH-1 generated 300 pounds per square inch of pressure, 3 times prior models. With gelled propellant, it projected flames up to 150 yards, almost triple the span of man-portable units. The propellant, a precise mix of diesel, gasoline, and napalm additive refined by the 43rd Chemical Laboratory, ignited at 1500 degrees Fahrenheit. It supported steady output for as long as 80 seconds, although guidelines advised short 2 to 3 second volleys to preserve reserves and ensure precision. Most importantly, the flame projector supplanted the vehicle's primary cannon, enabling a full 270-degree rotation and adjustment from 10 to plus under 35 degrees via the tank's standard targeting mechanisms. The operator could direct the Inferno with the precision of a regular artillery piece, relying on the identical periscope and the incorporation of the chemical branch system into the tank's hydraulic setups ensured that operators needed only basic familiarization to handle the upgraded armament proficiently. Yet the most profound advancement lay in its mental impact. The chemical branch specialists coated these altered vehicles in the usual Marine Corps olive drab finish, devoid of any distinctive symbols or hints of their devastating intent. From the Japanese viewpoint, they resembled everyday Sherman tanks right up until the instant they unleashed their barrage. By that point, escape was impossible. The propulsion mechanism was an engineering triumph in its own right. Primary reservoirs stored 290 gallons of gelled fuel, supplemented by 10 gallons of standard fuel for starting the blaze. An isolated pressurized vessel held compressed nitrogen, selected instead of air since it couldn't fuel fires even if breached. The setup incorporated numerous safeguards to avoid the devastating blasts that had doomed prior flamethrowing apparatuses. Within the command post under Hill 382, General Kurabayashi arranged his fortifications based on exact geometric principles. Overlapping lethal sectors intersected at calculated angles. Concealed observers in foxholes could summon barrages to any map square almost immediately. Gun emplacements formed crisscrossing coverage that funneled U.S. troops into zones pre-marked for shelling. The commander's strategy boiled down to a refined axiom. Ration shells, stay buried, force the enemy to close in. His directives to all officers were crystal clear. Hold out until you've taken down 10 Americans. Broad offensives were forbidden. Troops were ordered to hold ground until overwhelmed, then resort to explosives, blades, and ultimately fists. Basic arithmetic indicated that 21,000 troops could deliver 210,000 wounds, outnumbering the full U.S. landing contingent. Japanese fortification tactics had advanced markedly from the initial island clashes in the Pacific. Reports from Saipan and Palaleu highlighted the risks to flame weapon users. The telltale dark plume from ignited diesel rendered them highly visible. Their short reach forced handlers into open exposure. In earlier fights, handheld flame unit losses topped 70%, with certain squads seeing 92% fatalities for their specialists. Drills focused on countermeasures against such devices. Gunners learned to focus volleys on troops lugging the signature dual canisters of a backpack flamethrower. Marksmen got bonus rounds aimed at picking off those handlers. Foot soldiers rehearsed charges on flame spots using knives, capitalizing on the device's close-quarters blind spot where the user couldn't angle the stream downward for protection. However, all Imperial strategies presumed infantry-borne flames. The idea of mounted versions, armored vehicles advancing on strong points shielded by plating while hurling precise fiery strikes from extraordinary distances, hadn't entered their calculations. Their bunkers, engineered to endure shelling from sea and sky, lacked adaptations for liquid fire that could infiltrate cracks in air vents. This gap in foresight would lead to ruin. What had been Japan's sturdiest assets morphed into fatal enclosures when assaulted by arms that transformed unyielding barriers into infernos. On February 19th, D-Day, The 8 M4A3 flame tanks touched down on Iwo Jima's shores, blended with the standard Shermans from the 4th and 5th Tank Battalions. The Corps' formal label was M4A3R5, although records varied, citing POA CWS-H1 or CBMK-1. They hit the beach in the 5th assault wave, roughly at 1,000 hours, once the landing zones were somewhat stabilized. Fleet directives kept them back during the opening push. Corps leaders preferred to gauge the battlefield before deploying these precious one-off resources. Distribution was deliberate, 4 to the 4th Marine Division, 4 to the 5th. Each bore an ID from 431 to 438. A few operators had stenciled monikers on their rides: Hellfire, Corkscrew, Blaze of Glory. Most stayed blank, their lethal role concealed until activation. Over the initial day, these flame units lingered unused by the shore as hundreds of Marines fell, struggling to push past unseen enemy holds. The powdery volcanic soil, piling up to mid-calf per stride, drained the foot soldiers' energy. Standard maneuvers collapsed disastrously. Shipboard cannons failed to breach shelters sunk beneath 10 feet of lava stone and cement. Howitzer rounds burst ineffectively on outposts built to shrug off 16-inch warship strikes. Firearms alone weren't enough. U.S. Marine infantrymen faced defenses that seemed impregnable, like unyielding cliffs. The initial assault's toll was immense: 2,420 Marines either dead or injured on day one. The shoreline turned into a deadly trap when concealed Japanese cannons unleashed hell on the clustered troops. Efforts by Sherman tanks to push forward stalled in the soot-like soil or ended in flames from hidden anti-armor weapons. As darkness fell, the attackers had barely gained 700 yards from the water's edge, well behind the D-Day goals that aimed to seize the initial airstrip. Come dawn on February 20th, D-Poise 1, things looked grim. The 21st Marine Regiment stalled while trying to traverse Motoyama Airfield No. 1. 3 reinforced bunkers controlled the path, their overlapping bursts from automatic weapons forming a lethal corridor spanning 200 yards. A pair of infantry units had already been shredded in direct charges. Within under 48 hours, the outfit endured 35% losses. Lieutenant Colonel William Duplantis, leader of the 3rd Battalion in the 21st Marines, took the bold step that shifted the fight's momentum. He requested the incendiary armored vehicles. At 14:20, the debut of an M4A3R3 flame-throwing tank hit the battlefield. Vehicle 431, under Staff Sergeant Robert Meza, a survivor of Saipan and Tinian, neared the enemy's strongholds from a sideways tack, shielding behind wrecked Japanese planes. From the defender's view, it just looked like yet another ordinary Sherman repeating the doomed rush. The machine moved deliberately. Meza knew stealth was their edge. Within, the 5-person team braced for the clash. The operator, Private First Class James Morrison, steered through the volcanic grit that risked miring the 35-ton beast. His helper, Private Robert Chen, handled the front-mounted gun, scanning for foot soldiers. The munitions handler, Corporal Anthony Vitelli, monitored the propellant indicators, 300 psi, perfect for peak distance. The operator, Corporal Thomas Carlson, sighted via his viewer, locking on the closest bunker. When they closed to 125 yards of the primary target, Meza commanded, "Operator, ignite the projector. Bunker, unleash." The CBH-1 projector roared like infernal welding in accounts from onlookers. A jet of gelatinous incendiary petroleum soared via pressurized gas, slamming the fort's opening with lethal precision, seeping past the gun slit and pouring inward like molten rock. The impact was swift and gruesome. Heat within the hardened enclosure spiked beyond 1,200 kF almost instantly. Air depleted so fast that the occupants choked before the inferno fully engulfed them. Survivors of the first wave bolted for back doors, only to fall under rifle fire from Marines positioned precisely for such escapes. Sergeant Meza pivoted the main housing 30 degrees to hit the next bunker. Now alert, the foe countered with a 47mm anti-armor piece at close range. The round smacked the Sherman's forward plating and bounced harmlessly upward. The rig jolted, yet pressed on. Carlson unleashed a sustained spray, holding it for 15 seconds until dark fumes poured from all the structure's vents. The final bunker demanded a shift in approach. Sheltered by a jagged ridge, it blocked straight shots. Misa directed Morrison to close to a risky 80 yards, perilously near enemy troops. As the tank topped a minor ridge, foes burst from camouflaged pits, charging with explosive packs and adherent bombs. The forward gunner blasted away with his .30 caliber, but a few assailants slipped into the dead zone. Here, the CB's upgrades shone. While typical flame carriers shot only ahead, the CBH-1's complete rotation let Carlson whirl the turret 180 degrees and blast rearward. The onrushing troops vanished in a fiery barrier that bystanders likened to infernal portals parting. Once that last bunker fell, the 21st Marines surged 400 yards in just 2 hours, more ground than in the prior 48. News raced via Marine radio channels. The flame tanks delivered. Crucially, they endured where regular ones crumbled. In 6 hours, all 8 such units deployed along the line. The shift in tactics transformed the campaign overnight. Unit 4-34, aiding the 23rd Marines by the East Boat Basin, raised 4 defensive nests in one afternoon. Its operators devised a spiral scorch method, circling to dodge armor-piercing shots while keeping up relentless fire. The mental toll rivaled the material ruin. Japanese. The troops, drilled to hold their ground until the end, started pulling back from their strongholds as soon as they spotted the fire-breathing vehicles rolling in, leaving behind their defenses to escape being burned alive. Vehicle 437 led the way in penetration and neutralization strategies alongside the 24th Marines. Initially, the Flamethrower would disable the occupants of a site. Afterward, Corps engineers dashed ahead with explosives to obliterate the structure for good. This paired approach turned out to be overwhelmingly successful against sites that had held off several days of standard attacks. During one afternoon, just one such fire vehicle and its support crew took out 7 pillboxes that had halted a whole battalion's progress. Yet, it was Vehicle 432 that truly showcased the device's mental toll on the enemy. Aiding the 26th Marines at the foot of Mount Suribachi, the vehicle neared a network of linked caverns. Sergeant William Patterson, the commander, directed his operator to halt about 100 yards from the openings. Peering through the vehicle's viewer, Patterson observed Japanese troops peering out from the shadows. He unleashed a brief spurt of fire skyward, just as a show of force. The mental blow hit right away and was without parallel. Japanese personnel started bolting from back openings, deserting spots they were commanded to guard with their lives. The Marine shooters were caught so off guard that they at first didn't shoot at the withdrawing foes. Within 30 minutes, a complete defense zone fell apart, all without the vehicle aiming its flames straight at foe locations. This marked the initial large-scale desertion of strongholds in the annals of Japanese forces. By dusk on February 20th, Marine groups were already adjusting their methods based on the presence of these fire vehicles. Offensive schemes got delayed until the fire units could be moved up. Foot soldiers got trained to trail 50 yards in the rear, near enough to capitalize on the disorienting influence, yet distant enough to dodge the thermal wave that might scorch facial hair from 30 yards away. Shell spotters started pinpointing objectives meant especially for fire vehicle action instead of routine shelling. The figures from that initial day of fire vehicle action stood out sharply. 47 hardened sites eliminated. Marine losses in backed areas dropped 40% compared to the day before. 600 yards of ground captured in zones that had stayed unchanged for 48 hours. But the key measure was in the mind. For the first time, substantial groups of Japanese personnel were giving up their posts instead of perishing there. The Japanese counter was quick, yet mostly futile. General Kuribayashi sent out urgent directives that evening, labeling the fire vehicles as top targets. Every 47mm anti-armor cannon on hand was to focus shots on these machines. Dedicated strike squads were formed, made up of willing fighters carrying blast packs bound to themselves. Foot units received orders to aim steady rifle volleys at the fire vehicle's sight ports, aiming to disorient the operators. Still, the core issue stayed impossible to overcome. The fire vehicles resembled ordinary Shermans until they unleashed their payload. Japanese spotters couldn't pick out the key threats until the moment had passed. Even worse, zeroing in on fire vehicles left them open to standard tanks offering protective barrages. The U.S. side had pulled off a strategic edge via engineering ingenuity. On February 23, D+4, the very day Marines hoisted the flag atop Mount Suribachi, the fire vehicles met their toughest challenge. The 3rd Marine Division was pushing to seize Hill 382, Iwo Jima's second tallest peak and the linchpin of Kuribayashi's northern barriers. The rise was riddled with shelters and passages, plunging 7 levels deep. Japanese guards had zeroed in every path with cannons and grenade launchers. The setup, crafted by Japanese builders, was meant to be unbreakable. Layered barriers, overlapping shoot zones, buried walkways letting guards pop up in attackers' rear. Earlier pushes had collapsed with over 50% losses. The 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, had suffered 70% attrition just trying to reach the hill's base. At 0800, 4 fire vehicles moved up in staggered lines, backed by 6 regular Shermans and a Marine foot battalion. On this occasion, the Japanese were set. Concealed 75mm pack howitzers, bigger than the usual 47mm anti-armor pieces, were placed just to hit fire vehicles. As the front fire vehicle topped the initial slope, a barrage burst from 3 hidden spots. The opening hit vehicle 433's tread, locking it in place. The operators kept blasting flames even while stuck, forming a wall of fire that hid the trailing units and pinned down Japanese sights. This bold stand let the rest of the vehicles shift positions. Vehicle 431 forged ahead amid the haze, pressing on despite shelling that would have halted. The infantry push felt brutally frigid. Shrapnel pinged off the vehicle's plating like a fierce hailstorm. Private First Class Morrison, the operator behind the wheel, would recount steering via the viewing scope amid fog so dense it obscured anything beyond a mere 10 feet. When Tank 434 closed to within 60 yards of the primary Japanese fortification cluster, its incendiary weapon ignited. Yet, on this occasion, the enemy had evolved their defenses. Their specialists had fitted metal shields across the bunker slits, designed to seal shut during intervals in the gunfire. The blaze merely scattered uselessly over the fortified barriers. It appeared the foe had devised a way to neutralize the fire-projecting vehicles. Then, Gunner Corporal Michael Rodriguez spotted a vital detail. Following prolonged exposure to the heat, those metal covers turned a glowing crimson. At such temperatures, the material would distort, forming openings. Rodriguez kept the stream going for a full 45 seconds, well beyond standard guidelines, risking a severe drain on their propellant stores. Eventually, the shield deformed. The burning fluid surged into the breaches. The structure's core transformed into a raging blaze. Munitions detonated in a series of blasts. The reinforced walls fractured under extreme heat stress. Follow-up detonations exposed the hidden access points that Japanese builders had meticulously hidden. Ground troops surged ahead, lobbing demolition packs into each crevice to prevent any enemy rally. Within just 3 hours, the perimeter fortifications atop Hill 382 lay penetrated. The once unassailable stronghold was crumbling, though the engagement also exposed the vulnerabilities of these specialized armored units. Tank 431 depleted its entire load after only 80 seconds of non-stop use. Replenishing meant pulling back to secure zones where dedicated supply vehicles stood ready, a procedure demanding at least 2 hours. In that interval, the opposition could regroup and bolster their lines. These machines packed immense punch, yet their endurance was finite. Perhaps most notably, that very day, Corporal Herschel Woody Williams proved the enduring value of handheld incendiary devices. As the armored fire unit struggled to traverse a tight gorge dubbed the amphitheater, Williams pressed on dismounted, shouldering a cumbersome 70-pound M22 unit. Over 4 hours of intense fighting, shielded merely by a squad of 4 shooters, 2 of whom perished while guarding him, Williams neutralized 7 entrenched outposts beyond the reach of vehicles. His method meshed seamlessly with the tank-based approach. In spots vehicles couldn't access, courageous soldiers bearing portable flames could still press the attack. His exploits earned him the Medal of Honor that day. He emerged as the final living holder of that award from World War II, departing this life in June 2022 at 98 years old. Part of his commendation stated, "Quick to volunteer his services when our tanks were maneuvering vainly to open a lane for the infantry through the network of reinforced concrete pillboxes, buried mines, and black volcanic sands." Corporal Williams daringly went forward alone to to attempt the reduction of devastating machine gun fire from the unyielding positions. The data from the initial 7 days of fighting painted an impressive picture. In zones supported by these flame vehicles, troop losses among Marines fell 40% relative to unaided offensives. Enemy strongholds that withstood multiple days of traditional barrages collapsed in mere hours. The octet of vehicles had burned through 70,000 gallons of the volatile blend over those 7 days, obliterating roughly 300 hardened sites. Each day's usage hit an average of 10,000 gallons, posing a major supply hurdle that necessitated setting up dedicated storage points close to the combat zone. By the start of March, the conflict had relocated to the elevated northern expanse of Iwo Jima, a nightmarish terrain riddled with fumes from sulfur vents, jagged gullies, and jagged lava outcrops that rendered armored movement all but unfeasible. General Kuribayashi had cited his ultimate barrier here for that very reason. The landscape inherently aided the holding force. Marines had branded the sector the meat grinder after suffering 850 losses to seize one modest rise. Armored units trying to cross the rugged surface often snagged their treads on razor-edged stones or grounded themselves on unseen hurdles shrouded in dust. The incendiary tanks improvised once more. Hampered in mobility, they shifted to static strongpoints at strategic spots, bolstering foot soldier pushes. Personnel from the 5th Engineer Battalion labored overnight to build inclines and remove blockages, frequently dodging marksmen so the flame units could access spots deemed unreachable. Whenever a straight-on charge failed, the vehicles lobbed indirect bursts, ricocheting the streams off boulders to curve around bends and strike into shielded spots. On March 8, D-17, Tank 436 pulled off what the operators termed an unbelievable feat. Aiding the 29th Marines' drive against Cushman's Pocket, a maze of caverns and shelters carved into a sheer cliff, the unit's leader, Sergeant Daniel Foster, figured that launching the flame at peak height could curve beyond the ledge and drop onto the enemy from overhead. The trajectory was borderline feasible. The CBH-1 system topped out at 35-degree elevation, yet hitting the mark called for 40-degree. Foster directed his operator to maneuver the armored vehicle perched atop a mound of debris from the naval shelling, causing it to lean sharply rearward. As the tank teetered on the edge with hostile mortar shells exploding nearby, Corporal Anthony Vitelli, the gunner, activated the flamethrower. Streams of searing napalm soared upward, paused briefly at their peak, and then poured down onto the enemy strongholds. The impact proved catastrophic, both in terms of destruction and morale. Troops from Japan had assumed their high ground, shielded them from flamethrower assaults. That notion perished amid the blaze. Accounts described enemy fighters jumping off the bluffs to avoid being burned alive, opting for a fatal plunge instead of the flames. And by the middle of March, these flamethrower vehicles had become the focal point of an integrated combat approach. Every flame tank worked alongside a specialized escort unit. Standard tanks handled the suppression of faux anti-tank weapons, foot soldiers provided intimate defense from banzai charges, sappers cleared barriers, and supply trucks delivered the 300-gallon fuel units that prolonged mission duration. Such coordination marked a breakthrough in offensive strategies, shaping U.S. Marine tactics for years to come. Managing the fuel supply demanded immense resources. Second-class Kissel, an electrician mate and early innovator, had joined the tanks on Iwo Jima to oversee upkeep. He subsequently noted that sustaining the 8 machines involved a logistics network extending all the way to Pearl Harbor. Blending facilities ran non-stop, merging diesel, petrol, and napalm thickener in exact proportions. The concoction needed deployment within 72 hours, lest it break apart and jam the projectors. The adversaries adapted their countermeasures too. Dedicated anti-armor squads emerged, made up of recruits who rushed forward with bombs bound to their torsos. These living explosives scored occasional hits. On March 11th, Tank 438 fell when a faux soldier blew himself up against its power plant, claiming 3 out of 5 onboard personnel. Yet these methods yielded little long-term gain. For each damaged flame unit, fresh ones landed from the shore and impaired vehicles were typically fixed and redeployed swiftly. From his underground post below the North Ridge, General Kuribayashi assessed the broader consequences. In a dispatch to High Command dated March 17th, he stated, "The foe's unique flame vehicles surpass the combined might of their cannons and airstrikes. They accomplish in moments what traditional arms fail to achieve over days. No viable defense exists against this tool. The U.S. forces boast not only greater quantities, but also greater ingenuity." The climax unfolded in late March as Leathernecks advanced into the canyon, the commander's final bastion. This labyrinth of gullies and hideouts, dubbed the Bloody Gorge by the troops, posed the supreme challenge between U.S. ingenuity and Japanese resolve. Within a zone under 700 yards across, the surviving threes and holdouts readied for their endgame. On March 21st, D+30, the working flamethrower tanks, 6 from the initial batch with 2 in the shop, gathered for a unified push. They gained support from 4 more units shipped urgently from Hawaii. Although these fresh variants employed the inferior Ronson mechanism with a mere 60 to 80-yard reach, the operation would feature the war's biggest assembly of incendiary arms in the Pacific. Tank 431, restored after immobilization on Hill 382, spearheaded the move. Its plating showed battle wear, welded covers over shrapnel breaches, depressions from countless glancing blows, and burns from close calls. Unit 433, sporting a jury-rigged tread fix that produced a unique rattling noise, covered the left side. Vehicles 434, 436, and 437 held the middle, as 432 secured the right. The offensive kicked off at 1,000 hours, the tanks moving in a curved line to generate interlocking fire zones, denying any safe spots for the defenders. Infantry trailed behind, lobbing white phosphorus grenades into tunnel mouths to signal spots for the flame projectors. Sappers with explosives then blocked off cleared sites. The opposition's zeal burned fierce, but proved ever more pointless. Kamikaze groups burst from concealed pits, only to get torched short of their marks. Bazookas and guns blazed at near-zero range, operators persisting even as fire consumed their posts. In a remarkable episode, a Japanese leader stepped out of a shelter wielding a katana, sprinting straight toward Tank 434. The front machine gunner withheld shots, maybe stunned or in awe, letting rifle squads drop the man mere steps away. The enemy's sword was eventually retrieved and forwarded to Marine Corps Command as an emblem of their feudal bravery. As the sun dipped below the horizon on March 21st, U.S. forces had pushed through the ravine. More than 800 Japanese troops were slain, with numerous bodies charred past identification. The armored flamethrower units had burned through 8,000 gallons of their incendiary blend in just one day, setting a new benchmark for the operation. Though Marine losses remained heavy, 92 fatalities and 257 injuries, they paled in comparison to the toll of a traditional offensive. Yet the cost of triumph was evident for everyone involved. Crews manning the tanks described profound mental anguish stemming from their part in the carnage. Corporal Carlson from Tank 431 recounted in testimony years later. The cries echoed when the fire struck. They didn't last, but the echoes lingered into the darkness. I still catch them. We carried out our duty, yet that odor haunts me. Seared skin blended with the acrid tang of sulfur in the volcanic terrain. Repair teams discovered human fragments melded to the treads, necessitating oxyacetylene torches for cleanup. The vehicles themselves were wearing down from relentless battlefield demands. Gearboxes gave out due to the abrasive volcanic dust. Lines for fuel became blocked by residue from the napalm concoction. Pins on the tracks snapped under the burden of extra shielding plates affixed for safety. By the end of March, sustaining just 4 functional tanks meant scavenging components from wrecked ones. On March 26, 1945, Jima was officially secured. What was supposed to take 5 days stretched into 36. U.S. losses reached 2638 overall, with 6,121 deaths, a figure that stunned both civilians and top brass. Japanese fatalities approached annihilation. From an estimated 21 garrisoned fighters, only 216 emerged as captives. The others perished in combat, or, as the fight wore on, took their own lives to evade imprisonment or incineration. These specialized flame vehicles had utterly altered the conflict's flow. After-action reviews attributed to them a savings of roughly 5,000 American lives. They obliterated more than 1,000 entrenched sites, guzzled 360,000 gallons of fuel mix, and reshaped marine assault strategies forever. Above all, though, they shattered the legend of Japanese impregnability in fortified holds. Captain Frank Caldwell, who led Company F of the 26th Marines, offered the sharpest verdict. Above all else, it was the flame tanks that clinched the victory here. Shelling from guns on land or sea, plus bombs from above, failed to dislodge the Japanese from their subterranean strongholds. Only the flame tanks accomplished the impossible. Data breakdowns underscored the profound effect. Flame-based arms, whether vehicle-borne or handheld, accounted for over 30% of Japanese deaths on Ujima. In zones patrolled by flame tanks, forward progress surged 300 faster than in unassisted pushes. Captives from Japan, uncommon in Pacific clashes, totaled 216, exceeding the aggregate from Tarawa, Saipan, and Pleu. Several pointed directly to the terror of fiery death as their motive for yielding. The lessons rippled well past Ujima. The Marine Corps promptly ordered 54 more flame tanks for upcoming missions. Colonel Unum's unit at Schofield Barracks ramped up output at full throttle. With priority matching that of the B-29 program and the Manhattan effort, they refined the CBH-2 variant for better reach and dependability. Come June 1945, 70 upgraded flame tanks stood prepared for Operation Downfall, the anticipated assault on Japan proper. The Army, inspired by Marine triumphs at Ujima, hastened its parallel initiative for flame-equipped armor. The full 713th Tank Battalion shifted to these units ahead of Okinawa. In the Okinawa fight, from April to June 1945, Army flame tanks devoured 200,000 gallons of their fuel compound, demonstrating similar prowess against cavern networks in the island's southern reaches. What started as a hasty battlefield hack evolved into essential gear across the Pacific theater. Yet the broader ramifications transcended mere combat methods. Centuries-honed Japanese strategy crumbled utterly before U.S. inventive prowess. These flame tanks stood for far more than innovative arms. They symbolized the shift in war from personal valor to mass production might. The output figures speak volumes. Colonel Unmar's flame tank outfit churned out 354 such machines by the conflict's close. The CBS facility at Chayfield Barracks yielded 226,243 gallons of flamethrower fuel. Their on-site napalm facility churned out 1,000 gallons daily. This manufacturing muscle, echoed throughout the Pacific, allowed U.S. troops to scorch paths straight through enemy lines. The CBS innovators behind these tools garnered scant acclaim in the spotlight. Machinist Mate Reicher and electricians Mate Kissel faded back into civilian life. In the years following the conflict, the identities of those innovators faded into obscurity, mentioned solely in specialized military archives. Colonel Unum persisted in his work on chemical agents right up to his departure from service, with his role in securing triumph acknowledged by just a handful of defense scholars. Nevertheless, their breakthrough had protected countless U.S. troops and accelerated the end of one of the fiercest clashes in the Pacific Campaign. The operators of those armored vehicles encountered distinct hardships. Numerous individuals grappled with conditions now identified as combat-related trauma. Visions of soldiers reduced to cinders, cries silenced by engulfing fire, tormented fighters who had simply fulfilled their obligations. Sergeant Meeser remained silent about his wartime role until the final moments before his passing in 1993, confiding in his grandson, "We did what we had to do." No one ought to take satisfaction in setting people ablaze, yet those vehicles rescued numerous Marine fighters. That's the aspect I strive to keep in mind. After the war, survivors from the flame-throwing units established an unofficial circle of mutual aid. They gathered each year in Hawaii, revisiting the Schofield Barracks site of their equipment's assembly. These private meetings, overlooked by the press, gave participants a space to recount ordeals beyond the grasp of ordinary folks. The final such event occurred in 2010, with merely 4 remaining operators present. Insights from the Japanese side surfaced gradually via interviews with captives and seized records. troops indoctrinated to view battlefield demise as a path to eternal elevation, instead froze in dread of being burned alive. The shame of withdrawing from defensive lines felt less severe than perishing in subterranean infernos. Such mental breakdown spurred the initial mass capitulations in Japan's armed forces annals. Lieutenant Yamada, who observed the debut assault by a flamethrower-equipped tank on February 20th, endured the fight among the 216 who surrendered. During post-war debriefs with U.S. interrogators, he observed, "We had braced for all manner of fatalities, rifle fire, explosives, close-quarters combat, even deprivation. We hadn't anticipated ignited fuel that pursued us into our most secure shelters. Those flame vehicles shattered our resolve in manners unmatched by traditional arms. They converted our key asset, the subterranean defenses, into fatal traps." Former Sergeant Masao Hayashi, taken after sustaining burns while escaping a shelter, delivered vivid accounts. The napalm surged like a torrent, flooding every crevice. Soldiers attempted flight via side passages, only to meet additional blazes. Certain ones took their own lives to avoid the agony. Others charged toward U.S. lines, opting for shots over flames. I witnessed veterans hardened by years in China who balked at reoccupying spots once flame tanks neared. This wasn't the end we'd been drilled to embrace. The shift ushered in by those flamethrower vehicles carried over into peacetime. The U.S. Marine Corps, reviewing the triumph at Oma, overhauled its offensive strategies to emphasize integrated operations blending vehicles, foot soldiers, and support specialists. Tailored armored units for targeted combat scenarios entered mainstream doctrine. Subsequent armament efforts stressed flexibility and creativity rather than sheer destructive power alone. The machinery itself advanced further. Versions of the M4A3R3 Sherman with flame projectors saw action in Korea, demonstrating similar potency against fortified Chinese setups amid fights for the Punch Bowl and Heartbreak Ridge. During the Korean conflict, Marine flame units neutralized more than 300 enemy strongholds, albeit with reduced shock value thanks to the adversary's familiarity with the tech. The final U.S. flame vehicle, the M132 mechanized projector mounted on the M113 troop carrier, remained in service until 1978, concluding a heritage that originated with 8 hurriedly adapted Shermans in a concealed Hawaiian facility. By that point, thermobaric devices and guided projectiles had supplanted flamethrowers for breaching entrenchments. Global treaties later curbed such incendiaries through Protocol 3 of the Convention on certain conventional weapons, deeming them overly brutal. The tool pivotal at Uoima grew contentious as societal views turned against arms seen as needlessly savage. Still, experts in military history highlight the paradox. Despite the terror, those flamethrower vehicles hastened the engagement's resolution and likely spared thousands from losses a standard advance would have inflicted. The manufacturing feat merits emphasis. America built 49,134 Sherman tanks in World War II. Just 304 received flame modifications. However, this limited batch exerted influence well beyond its scale. At Uoima, 8 units altered the conflict's trajectory, averting what could have dragged on for months with tens of thousands additional tolls. The adaptation expense, about $200,000 each in 1945 dollars, pales against the preserved existences. Defense evaluators determined that every flame vehicle at Uoima likely safeguarded 625 American calculations of potential American losses, drew from casualty figures in unsupported assaults compared to those bolstered by flame support. In the grim math of combat, this technological outlay had yielded substantial savings in lives preserved. Yet the deepest impact lingered in the mind. Those flamethrower vehicles showed how inventive breakthroughs could shatter even the fiercest displays of human determination. The time of solo fighter heroism was fading, giving way to an epoch where triumph favored countries excelling in massive manufacturing output and engineering advances. For all its honor, the warrior ethos proved powerless against streams of ignited fuel unleashed from factory-built apparatuses. Amid the ash-rich earth of Iwo Jima, under memorials to valor and loss, rest the bones of more than 20,000 Japanese troops slain while guarding sites they deemed unassailable. Countless were consumed by armaments beyond their wildest conceptions. Their passing signaled not merely a conflict's close, but the close of a period when sheer willpower might trump physical shortcomings. The 8 M4A3R3 flame tanks engaged at Iwo Jima stood as mere contrivances in the end. Metal plating, lightweight alloys, synthetic treads, and geared parts put together by laborers far from the front lines. Still, they embodied far more. They symbolized the harnessing of U.S. manufacturing power, research ingenuity, and engineering prowess toward securing success. The specialists who crafted them, the Marines who maneuvered them, and the Japanese who perished against them all contributed to a shift that shaped contemporary combat. Nowadays, the sole remaining flame tank from Iwo Jima resides in the National Museum of the Marine Corps at Quantico, Virginia. Vehicle Serial 434, now on exhibit, carries the marks of its campaigns: fusion seams from repaired plating, craters from projectile strikes, gouges from jagged lava. A modest inscription details its specs and combat record. It fails to capture, however, the hiss of pressurized gas bursting forth, the acrid scent of ignited gel fuel blended with brimstone, the vision of molten streams cascading like rivers into subterranean strongholds. Tourists frequently hurry by, unsettled by the device's grim intent. Young students on excursions wonder aloud why such a monstrous tool was ever devised. Battle-hardened survivors, grasping its backstory, linger more, with some rendering salutes and others gazing wordlessly in tribute. To those veterans, the vehicle evokes not a celebration of conflict, but an acknowledgement of conflict's harsh demands. The final gathering of Iwo Jima flame tank survivors occurred in 2015, marking the 70th year since the clash. Just 3 operators showed up, each over 90 years old. They convened at the museum, recounting tales to archivists keen on safeguarding personal testimonies. Corporal Anthony Vitelli, once the loader on Unit 4 and 36, delivered maybe the most touching reflection. Folks inquire whether I take pride in our actions. Pride doesn't fit. We carried out a dreadful duty that was unavoidable. Those vehicles protected fellow Marines. That suffices. Nearly all those who conceived, constructed, and commanded these devices have faded from the scene. Corporal Herschel Woody Williams, who battled beside the flame tanks using his own handheld version, was the final Iwo Jima Medal of Honor awardee to depart in June 2022 at 98 years old. He took with him the ultimate direct recollection of flame-based combat's brutal truth. His organization persists in commemorating families of the fallen, guaranteeing that the toll of the deceased endures in memory. Colonel Unmar's once secret dispatches, released in the 1970s, exposed the urgent rhythm of development behind the flame tanks. Laboring through 24-hour cycles and napping in turns next to their fabrication tools, the CWS team achieved in months what standard arms acquisition might have dragged out over years. Their payoff came in witnessing their invention outperform every projection, hastening the conclusion of one of the Pacific Theater's most savage engagements. Japanese military records, made accessible to scholars in the 1980s, offer the adversary's viewpoint on confronting flame tanks. Document succeeding document depicts the helplessness of observing advancing infernos, realizing that bunkers and barriers provided zero shield. Commands to defend posts until the end lost all sense when demise arrived as creeping blazes infiltrating every refuge. A single enemy account observed, "The flame tanks erased every benefit of our prepared defenses. Elevation was irrelevant as flames could vault barriers. Layers of earth were pointless since the blaze seeped like liquid into our passages. Fortifications of cement and iron, resilient to massive blasts, crumbled before fluid infernos." General Kuribayashi's parting transmission, sent right before his demise in late March 1945, included a far-seeing remark. "The Americans didn't just overpower us through greater forces or armament, they overpowered us through greater creativity, converting our prime asset, our buried networks, into fatal snares. Coming conflicts will favor realms that devise fresh combat methods, not those refining outdated tactics." His forecast held true. The shift in military strategy that started with just 8 flamethrower tanks on Iwo Jima evolved further with advances like guided projectiles, accurate munitions, and digital combat. The core idea stayed the same: Cutting-edge technology overcomes outdated methods. Creativity outshines rigid traditions. Switching from standard to incendiary tactics on Iwo Jima occurred in mere days, yet it reshaped fighting principles permanently. Troops prepared for classic offensive maneuvers quickly adapted to work alongside flamethrower tanks, leveraging their terrifying impact to shatter seemingly unbreakable enemy fortifications. This fusion emerged not from structured drills, but from on-the-spot ingenuity and adjustments amid intense action, showcasing the adaptability of U.S. armed forces. Post-war data reviews uncovered compelling trends in areas patrolled by these tanks. Opposing forces were 70% more prone to vacate their strongholds prior to full assault. The mental toll surpassed the material damage. Simply spotting flamethrower tanks in a zone frequently triggered routes without a single burst. A Marine scouting document observed, "Enemy dread of flamethrower tanks nears hysteria. Captives described troops defying commands to hold spots after detecting tanks nearby." Those 8 armored fire projectors on Iwo Jima accomplished an extraordinary feat. Over 36 days of engagement, they confirmed a fresh approach to battle, preserved countless U.S. soldiers' lives, and aided triumph in a pivotal World War II clash. Their influence persisted in later wars where U.S. troops confronted dug-in foes spanning Korea, Vietnam, and Iraq. Still, ethical dilemmas linger unanswered. Surviving crew members frequently grappled with their actions. The ruthless speed of fiery death, the factory-like extent of burning, questioned age-old notions of just combat. These individuals served as tools of dire need, operating devices that reduced people to cinders almost instantly. Countless kept silent about their duty, carrying the nightmares to their final rest instead of sharing the anguish. A poignant closure arrived during a 1985 healing event on Iwo Jima. Ex-tank leader Robert Meza and former Lieutenant Koshi Yamada, who saw the initial flamethrower assault, gathered at the site where Tank 431 unleashed its first volley 4 decades prior. Yamada conveyed via translator, "I resented you for 40 years. The flamethrower tank slew my comrades in unforgettable manners, yet now I comprehend. Conflict turns us all into beasts. You acted as required, just as we did." Meza replied straightforwardly, "We were merely young lads fighting to endure. I'm relieved we both survived to meet here now." The elderly fighters hugged. As dusk fell across Iwo Jima's dark shores, the old soldiers strolled side by side to the monument honoring the fallen. In their wake, Mount Suribachi loomed against the fading light. The isle, once ablaze with war's rage, had reclaimed serenity. The era of the flamethrower tank dawned and faded in the Pacific, its mark etched in flames over lava-formed lands. 8 adapted Shermans altered combat's essence, proving that success in contemporary strife goes to countries that fuse manufacturing power with tactical ingenuity. Though the fires had extinguished long ago, their effect on armed history endures brightly. Ultimately, Iwo Jima's victory stemmed not solely from valor, plentiful on both fronts, but from blending U.S. production prowess with frontline creativity. Flamethrower tanks embodied the blend of tech, strategy, and resolve that would mark American dominance in warfare for years ahead. They stood as period-specific tools, harsh imperatives in a struggle requiring absolute success. The Japanese holdouts battled with unmatched resolve, obeying directives to fight until the end. They constructed the Pacific's toughest barrier, an underground citadel resistant to ordinary arms. However, they hadn't foreseen blazing devices that flowed like liquid inferno, infiltrating each cavern and shelter, converting their hidden refuge into an oven. Their downfall reflected no lack of bravery, but a clash with advanced tech and inventive thinking. The figures deliver the harsh truth starkly. 8 flamethrower tanks, 360,000 gallons of fuel blend, more than 1,000 reinforced sites eliminated, roughly 5,000 U.S. losses averted, over 6,000 enemy troops felled by fire, 36 days of fighting that could have dragged on for months absent these weapons. The equation of contemporary battle, where tech edges yield straight to preserved lives and secured fights. The fiery Isle of Iwo Jima, now back under Japanese control and called Iwoto, shows scant outward wounds from the fierce struggle that swept its terrain. The wild has overtaken the war zone, blanketing bomb holes with greenery. Vegetation now blankets the island with volcanic earth packed into former trenches. Yet below ground, enclosed caverns and ruined passages continue to conceal the bones of troops lost to the inferno. Their devotion is honored by diminishing numbers of survivors who bear witness. The final statement comes from General Holland Smith, leader of the 5th Amphibious Corps during the Iwo Jima campaign, as recorded in his autobiography. Those flamethrower vehicles turned the tide from triumph to disaster. Absent their use, the cost for each foot of that accursed terrain would have been intolerable. They represented dreadful instruments, yet conflict itself is a grim affair. Ultimately, they preserved more lives than any other tool in our arsenal. The fires that devoured Japanese strongholds on Iwo Jima have faded into memory. The operators of those machines have largely faded from the scene. Still, the shift they sparked, from hand-to-hand fighting to mastery through machinery, persists in influencing strategies across global forces. Through just 8 adapted Sherman tanks, the United States discovered the means to shatter the impasse at the Pacific conflict's toughest bastion, thereby altering the essence of battle irrevocably. The fight concluded. The broader war was not far behind. However, the reverberations of that blaze, the hiss of pressurized nitrogen, the torrent of molten fuel surging into hidden bunkers, the cries silenced by overwhelming blaze, linger eternally in the annals of armed conflict. On a fiery atoll in the Pacific, the era of the lone fighter perished amid the conflagration. The epic of mechanized combat dawned.